Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Rhiannon and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in February. Now, February was actually an amazing reading month for me, which I am so happy about. You guys know I've been in a really weird slump this past year, and so to be able to read 7 books in a month is mind-blowing to me, and yeah, it definitely seems like I'm getting my reading mojo back. So for the month of February, as I mentioned, I have read 7 books. I read 4 books physically, I listened to 3 audiobooks, and I have a range of different genres of books here to go through with you guys as well. I feel like this video is going to be on the longer side because I have so many books to talk about, so I am going to wrap up this intro here, and without further ado, let's just dive into the books. The first book I finished in February was Anything You Can Imagine, Peter Jackson and the Making of Middle-earth by Ian Nathan. In case you couldn't tell, this is a book following Peter Jackson as he tried to bring The Lord of the Rings to the cinema. It focuses on his personal history and background. It also focuses on his early years as a director, which then of course led him on to being the director for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. We see all of his struggles throughout that process, and not just the struggles of writing a script for this film, but just trying to condense the scale of Tolkien's work into 3 films, trying to acquire the rights in order to go ahead with making these films, the cast involved because some people were first cast as different actors but then either pulled out or were recast, the long process of filming 3 films back to back, and of course the general media coverage of this whole endeavour. I first sat down to read this physically, however I was really struggling to connect with the writing style. I found it to be quite dense just to sit down and read, and so I did decide to switch to the audiobook for this one, and I'm so glad I did, you guys. I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars. It is such an insightful book that highlighted Peter Jackson's impact on the film industry, and of course all of the struggles that he did have to face in order to bring The Lord of the Rings to our screens. As I mentioned, the audiobook was fantastic. The narrator did do different accents for the different people that were of course involved. So for Peter Jackson it was a New Zealand accent, then we had Elijah Wood who was American, Orlando Bloom for example is British, and so yeah, it definitely made it easier to differentiate between the different people that were speaking, because we do actually get interviews with different cast members in here. We have their recollections on what happened whilst they were filming and things like that, which again is a very fascinating element and a good little insight into what they were going through as well, being part of such a big production. So that in itself was also very nostalgic for me. For those of you who don't know, The Lord of the Rings are my favourite ever films. I am just completely obsessed with them. They have helped me through so much in my life and are genuinely my saving grace. And so I have a lot of thanks to give to Peter Jackson for bringing these films to life, because yeah, they've changed my life for the better and I genuinely would be lost without them. And so seeing all the hard work that actually went into creating these films definitely gives you a different perspective whilst you're watching the films. And I know I've watched the appendices, which are part of the Lord of the Rings extended editions, but I do feel like I got a little bit more out of this as well, which is of course what I wanted. So this book delivered for me. I absolutely loved it. The only thing I would have to say that is a little bit negative about it is that the Hobbit trilogies weren't really talked about all that much. Of course the big focus, and the big focus for me in particular, were the Lord of the Rings films. However, I would have liked to have just seen a little bit more of how Peter Jackson went from directing The Lord of the Rings 20 years ago to directing The Hobbit. Obviously we had advancements in different technologies, and I just would have enjoyed seeing a little bit more of what he had to go through with those films in particular. But other than that, absolutely love this one. It does also have pictures throughout, which again just show the behind the scenes of what was going on, which I very much appreciated. I love seeing things like this. That just makes you feel a little bit closer to the world. It doesn't take away the kind of magic of cinema to me to see the behind the scenes. I love seeing how things were made and brought to life. And so yeah, if you couldn't tell, I did really enjoy this book. I would highly recommend to any Tolkien fan or film fan, and I am so glad that I finally managed to read this one. The next 2 books I read were for Polathon, which if you guys don't know, Polathon is a polar fantasy inspired readathon hosted by Jade from JD Ray Reads, which essentially encourages you to read books set in a polar setting, so some sort of snowy, icy setting, and preferably a fantasy. But for this round we had a wheel that we had to spin in order to get our prompts, and so the first book that I actually read was Murder in the Snow by Verity Bright. The prompt for this book was cold word, and of course snow is a very cold word, so this fit perfectly. This is a murder mystery series set in the 1920s in which we follow Lady Eleanor Swift, who is a wealthy heiress. Her uncle did recently pass away, and so she has now inherited his house, Henley Hall. And as Christmas is approaching, she decides to host Christmas at Henley Hall this year and essentially give the villagers some fun activities to do and have a bit of a party. One of the main events of the day is the Christmas fun run, and all of the villagers gather around to support the people that are running the race. However, tragedy strikes when one of the runners drops dead at the finish line. Of course, police are called to look at the body, and they determine that the man died of a heart attack. However, Lady Eleanor Swift isn't quite so sure, and when the vicar of the town soon falls ill, Eleanor believes that he has been poisoned and is trying to look into the fact that these two cases are linked. Her suspicions are strengthened further when someone plants poisonous berries in her kitchen, and she is now racing against the clock to find out who the killer is and bring them to justice. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. It definitely wasn't the best book ever written, unfortunately. I did enjoy the mystery, but I did also guess who the culprit was, and so the big kind of plot twist reveal element of it just fell a bit flat for me. There is also some really questionable language in here, such as lunchy poos, which I of course just found to be very cringy, and it did pull me out of the story. This is also a very slow-paced book, guys. I really struggled to get into this one, especially because I read it physically. I think at around 100-page mark we still hadn't really gotten into the actual mystery. We just had a lot of characters getting together, discussing the events of the Christmas fun run, and then we weren't actually progressing plot-wise. So I did find this to be a bit of a slog, and then the pacing towards the end just changed gear completely. It was so fast-paced, everything went on, and it ended pretty abruptly. And so whilst it was a good murder mystery, there were those elements in it that just meant it couldn't get higher than a 3 stars from me, unfortunately. It is one that I would recommend though. I enjoyed the setting, I enjoyed the characters. Clifford the butler is one of my favourite characters ever, and to be honest, he's the one that kind of figured everything out. Eleanor Swift was just there whilst he was kind of going through theories, and then she just jumped on the bandwagon and kind of solved everything, which again definitely threw me a little bit, because I was like, Clifford deserves that credit. He's the one that sorted through everything and found out who the killer was. So yeah, there were a lot of things in this that I found questionable, but as a murder mystery it was a good one. I was definitely intrigued. I loved learning about different characters' backgrounds, and if you did want to read more about these characters, this is part of an extensive murder mystery series focusing on Lady Eleanor Swift. So you could check the author's backlog. She has a ton of books following these characters. Personally, I'm not sure if I will be diving back into her books just because this wasn't really for me, but saying that, I am glad that I read it. I probably wouldn't have picked it up had it not been for Polathon, and I do just want to say a 3-star rating for me isn't bad. I did enjoy it. There were just some elements that didn't work for me, unfortunately. Right, sorry if the angle has changed, guys. My battery died and I did have to pop in a new one, so please excuse that. But the next book that I read was Never Tell by Catherine Arden. I actually don't own a physical copy of this book. I did listen to the audiobook on Scribd, and so I will have popped a picture of the cover up on screen somewhere for you now. But this was a Russian-inspired polar fantasy / historical fiction novel in which we followed our main character Lena, who has spent all of her life in a Russian prison camp under Stalin's rule. One day though, Lena does manage to escape this camp with her best friend Bogdan, but the outside world is definitely not what she imagined it to be. As the pair journey across a snowy wilderness, they are pursued by a vengeful sorceress and her pack of shadow wolves. And so the children will of course need every ounce of courage and a little bit of magic if they are to survive. That's all I'm going to say about that one. I didn't really know too much about it diving in, but I was very pleasantly surprised by it and had a really good time reading it. This is another 3-star book for me. I enjoyed it, but it definitely wasn't my favourite book ever. The plot was definitely predictable, however I'm not the target audience, and so if a younger child were to read this, I feel like they would love it and they wouldn't see the different twists and turns coming. The magic in this is also really interesting as well, and I loved finding out more about the sorceress, her shadow wolves of course, and why she was so angry with the world. That was definitely a very nice touch, and again, seeing all this happen in a snowy setting was just magical, and it definitely was a perfect book to read for Polathon. I'm not sure if I would have enjoyed this book as much had I read it physically, because the audiobook was fantastic. It felt like I was listening to a classic fairy tale story, and the narrator just managed to capture every emotion. She again did differentiate between the different characters by using different voices and accents, and so I would highly recommend the audiobook if you guys were planning on picking this one up. Again, I feel like a younger audience would really enjoy this book and appreciate it a lot more, but for what it's worth, I had a good time reading it. It fit in perfectly for Polathon, and I am glad to have read it now, and I will definitely be picking up more works from this author as well. The next book that I picked up was Falling Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. This is a YA fantasy series that is often compared to a Game of Thrones, and I can definitely attest to that. This is such a gory and violent book where characters are just killed off without a second thought. So in this world, magic has long been forgotten, and the world, which is known as Mythica, has been split into 3 countries, where one of the countries is flourishing, the other isn't as bad but it's not doing the best, and the third is very impoverished. So while a hard-won peace has reigned for centuries, a deadly unrest is now simmering below the surface. As the rulers of each country grapple for power, the lives of all of their subjects are brutally transformed, including that of our 4 main characters, Cleo, Jonas, Lucia and Magnus. They are caught in a dizzying world of betrayals, shocking murders, secret alliances, unforeseen love, and also magic. The only outcome that is certain is that some kingdoms will fall, and our main characters need to make the choice between political duty and moral duty in order to play their part in the war that is to come. This book surprised me in the best way, you guys. I had heard so much about it before diving in, and I did kind of think that it would be one for me because of the premise of it and the different elements that were involved, but I had also heard a few negative reviews as well, and so I wasn't quite sure how it would be for me. However, I'm so glad that I did decide to pick this one up. I got sucked into the story from page 1. The action actually starts from page 1, like you were thrown in very quickly, which is definitely something that I appreciate in a book, especially as I've been so slumpy these past few months, and so to be thrown straight into the action was definitely a good thing for me, and it is such a fast-paced book throughout that you just fly through it. This is a multi-perspective book, of course, with us following 4 different main characters. We do have to see what's going on in their heads, and so we do switch perspectives throughout this book, which again is something that I do enjoy, as it does break up the story a little bit for me. We get to focus on different things that are going on in the different countries, and we do get snippets of information from each character as well. I will say that some things that happened in this book were definitely predictable and very convenient. It definitely should have taken a lot more time for some things to happen, as characters just again conveniently managed to find a way out of very dangerous situations with a lot of ease, and so that is my only kind of big critique about this. I'm assuming that as we go on, the writing style will just get better and better and we will see more character development. However, the magic in this was so interesting. Again, I can't wait to see more about that. I think we have just scratched the surface of that with this one, and I'm very excited to see it explored a lot more, especially as the mythology in this world is so strong and is such a huge belief for these people. So I am very much interested to see where we go from here. The second book is on my March TBR and I'm planning on picking it up very soon, so this is a series that I will be continuing on with. I'm so excited to do so, and as I mentioned, I feel like it's just going to get better from here. So this is one that I would highly recommend. It is definitely worth the hype, and I am excited but scared to see what the characters get up to in the rest of the books in the series. Next up, I read The Breaking by Amanda Cassidy. In this one, we follow Dr. Miriam Fitzpatrick, who goes on holiday to the Florida Keys with her husband, her daughter, and her adoptive daughter. Now, this should be a fun break for the family, however, it turns sour when their adoptive daughter, Alana, ends up going missing. The police are immediately suspicious of Mirren because she was alone drinking at a bar at the time her daughter went missing, and she was of course the one that was meant to be watching her. And because of this, a kind of trial by media ensues where Mirren is painted as the bad guy in this situation. ocean. And so when a small body is found in the ocean, you do have to ask yourself whether Mirren is a heartbroken mother or the architect of her daughter's fate. This was a relatively new purchase for me. I only bought it in December and I picked it up in Waterstones, I think when I went to the half price sale, because as soon as I read the synopsis it reminded me of the Madeleine McCann case. For those of you who don't know, Madeleine McCann was a young girl who went missing whilst on holiday with her family in Praia de Luz in Portugal, and of course people were sympathetic towards the parents at the start. There was a lot of media coverage and manpower to try and find Madeleine. However, the longer the search went on, the more the media turned against the parents and painted the parents as the bad guys. I will say that is definitely a prominent thing throughout this book. It is very, very similar to that case. I am very interested in true crime. I've watched a lot of documentaries about the Madeleine McCann case, and the way that this is written and the things that are mentioned are very similar to what happened in the Madeleine McCann case. So if you do want a thriller that is similar to a real life case, then I would highly recommend this one. I do just want to mention it doesn't say anywhere that this book is inspired by that case. It's just what I have noticed from my personal research and what I thought of whilst reading this book. This one is told in dual timeline and dual perspective, which again is something that I really did enjoy. It's only a short book and breaking it up like that just moves the story along so much quicker. Our main character Mirren is definitely an unreliable narrator though. I think that is an element that worked really well for this book because you just don't know who to trust. You're seeing Mirren from different perspectives, you are also inside her head, and so trying to piece together what happened is really difficult because you just don't know who to believe, and it seems like there are some different things at play here as well. I did end up giving this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed my time reading it. I got sucked into it straight away. There were a lot of twists and turns and I didn't manage to guess who the culprit was. The only thing I will mention is that everything wrapped up so quickly and the culprit did kind of come out of nowhere, which I was a bit shocked about. Plus we do have a bit of an open ending, which if you guys know me, you will know that that definitely frustrated me. I like to know what's happened in these books, and so to have an open ending where you thought that everything had wrapped up nicely but then oh no wait, this has now happened, it just kind of confused me a little bit, and I'm not sure if we're gonna have a second book. I doubt it because I feel like this story has now wrapped up, but I would like a definitive answer on what happened because it just wasn't satisfying for me, which is why it didn't get that 5 stars. All in all, I would recommend this though. I am gonna gift it to my mum to see what she thinks of it because she does enjoy reading thrillers. It is a well-written book, the pacing is fantastic, but if you don't like an open-ended book then maybe this one isn't the one for you. The next book I read in February was The Five by Hallie Rubenhold. This was an impulse read for me. I wasn't planning on picking this one up, however Chloe from Chloe Reads Books does host a true crime book club where they do read different true crime fiction and non-fiction books. You can probably tell that The Five was the pick for February, and because I had it and because I want to support Chloe, I did decide to join in on the read along. In case you don't know, this one does follow the lives of the 5 canonical victims of Jack the Ripper, who if you don't know was a serial killer in the 1800s who was never caught. I do just want to read you a little snippet from this book because it is something that stuck with me throughout the whole thing as I was reading it, and it's something that I wanted to mention in this video because if you didn't want to read this book before, you will definitely want to read it after I read this to you. So it says, "My intention in writing this book is not to hunt and name the killer. I wish instead to retrace the footsteps of 5 women, to consider their experiences within the context of their era, and to follow their paths through both the gloom and the light. They are worth more to us than the empty human shells we have taken them for. They were children who cried for their mothers. They were young women who fell in love. They endured childbirth and the deaths of parents. They laughed and celebrated Christmas. They argued with their siblings. They wept. They dreamed. They hurt. They enjoyed small triumphs. The courses their lives took mirrored that of so many other women of the Victorian age, and yet were so singular in the way they ended. It is for them that I write this book. I do so in the hope that we may now hear the stories clearly and give back to them that which was so brutally taken away with their lives, their dignity." So the women that we focus on are Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly. And I personally think that this book did manage to give them back their dignity. It doesn't focus on the killer or the killings at all in this. We just see what they went through in their personal lives and their last movements up to their death. This was such a hard-hitting book for me because, again, you do tend to forget that these were actual people. I think because it happened so long ago, we are now far removed enough from it to kind of look at it without any feeling. However, when you sit down and think about what these women went through, it is truly harrowing. As the author mentioned, these were women that had their own lives, they had their own families, they had jobs, they had so many different things that they cared about, and it was cruelly snatched away from them. And they were, of course, branded as prostitutes by the media, which isn't necessarily the case, as I found out whilst reading this, because I was just going off of what I'd heard previously from the documentaries that I've watched and the lessons that I was taught in school. However, once you take a deeper look at their lives, you find that the circumstances they were in were unfortunate because of other things that had happened in their lives before that, and they weren't necessarily the prostitutes and sex workers that they were made out to be. This book was also very well written. It is quite dense at some points, I'm not gonna lie. However, it's not info dumpy. It's told as a story of these women's lives, so it's not told in like essay format, which is something I appreciated, especially as I don't typically read non-fiction books. I didn't really feel stupid reading this. I felt like the author was treating us all as knowledgeable people who just wanted more information about these women. Now, the way I'm talking about this book, you would expect me to give it 5 stars. However, it was a 4-star book for me. It did take me a while to read this book just because of the fact that it was a non-fiction book. I felt like I did need to take breaks regularly throughout this, especially because we're focusing on the lives of real life women. I think it was definitely harrowing, which it's meant to be. This is not a nice book. It's meant to show you the brutality of life in the Victorian era. However, for me, I just felt like I needed a break because it was getting a bit too heavy. Also, I will just say, even though this writer sets out to prove that these women are not prostitutes, I feel like the overall message gets a bit confused because she keeps reiterating the fact that, oh, they're not prostitutes. Oh, they weren't prostitutes, so they shouldn't have been called that. But in my head, I was thinking, well, what does it matter if they were prostitutes? Does that mean they deserved this? No, of course they didn't. They're not any less of a person if they had to go out and do that as a job. It is what some people have to do, and so the author did kind of put it across as if to say that they deserved more because they weren't prostitutes and they were incorrectly labelled as such, but it just sounded as if she was trying to justify her points and views. However, again, if they were prostitutes, they didn't deserve to be killed anyway. And yeah, the overall tone of that aspect of it did kind of get to me a bit, because nobody deserves to have their life ended by another person. It doesn't matter what type of occupation you're in, it doesn't matter if you are finding yourself in a bad situation with drinks or drugs or anything like that. Nobody should take the life of another person. And so to try and justify that by saying that they were not prostitutes just hit the wrong note for me. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that is the only kind of issue I had with this book. Apart from that, I thought it was very well done. I really did enjoy learning about the women instead of the killer for a change, because again, I've researched this case so much, I'm so fascinated by it, but we very rarely hear about the lives of the women that were killed. It is very much focused on who Jack the Ripper could be and the type of people that were around in Victorian era London. And so the women tend to be forgotten about, and I'm very glad that Hallie Rubenhold has given them back their voice in this one. And then the last book that I'm going to talk about today is Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. This is the sequel to Ninth House, and in Ninth House we follow a young girl named Alex Stern, who is tasked with keeping Yale's secret societies in check. One day though, a young girl turns up dead, and Alex is the only one that is refusing to accept the police's neat answer of how she died, and so she decides to look into the case herself, and of course she gets swept into the world of magic, secret societies, and a murderer as well. I read Ninth House a while back now, I really did enjoy it, and so when Hellbent came out last month, I knew that I wanted to dive in straight away. Now this is another one where I listened to the audiobook for it, and I'm so glad that I did. That is how I consumed Ninth House, and I had the best time doing so. I will say I didn't love this book as much. I did end up giving this one 4 stars. However, there were just elements in this that I didn't completely gel with. I think in the first book, because everything is so new and fresh, the kind of level of danger seems really heightened for some reason. However, once you get to this book and you know what the characters have been through in that first book, it's not really as high stakes, and I wasn't really too bothered about what was happening throughout the majority of this book because I did feel like it was quite slow and we weren't actually seeing a lot of stuff, and so I think that was my main issue with it. I'd say from part 2 onwards it definitely picked up and I got a lot more interested in it. However, I definitely think I preferred Ninth House, though we did get more answers in this one, and the ending of this definitely confused me. I thought this was going to be a duology, but from that ending I assume it's a trilogy or a series now, which again I'm not too mad about. It's just that there was quite a big gap between the release of Ninth House and Hellbent, and I feel like I will have forgotten a lot of stuff by the time the newest book comes out, so I will definitely be a little bit more hesitant to dive into that one. However, I did have a good time listening to this one. I enjoyed being with familiar characters again. I won't spoil anything, but my favourites are definitely the detective or Doz. One of the characters in here people are obsessed with. I personally don't really see the hype that much. Like, I like the character, but not as much as other people, and I don't really know why. I feel like we're told to like this person so much that I've just not. But overall, I did really enjoy this one. I am glad that I've now read it, and hopefully it's not too long before the next book comes out, because as I mentioned, I will definitely have forgotten a lot of things that happen in this. I feel like I've already forgotten a lot of stuff that happened in this because there was a lot. Even though this book was slow, a lot did happen, and I honestly don't know how the next book is gonna go. So a 4 stars for this one. I enjoyed it, but not as much as Ninth House, and even though I have no idea where the series is gonna go from here, I am excited to be back with the same characters as they try and kind of fix the events that occurred in this book. So there we have it. These are all of the books that I read in February, and also Nevertell, of course. Please do let me know if you have any thoughts on these books down below. It is definitely a weird stack for me. It has a lot of different types of books and 2 non-fictions as well, which I don't typically read, but as I mentioned, I had a really good time reading the majority of these books, and it was definitely a good reading month for me as a whole. I do just want to say here that I really am trying to get better with my reviews. I know that these videos can be a bit all over the place sometimes, and I'm really sorry about that, but I have made it a goal of mine to post better reviews this year. I have a reading journal here. This is one that I did just buy off Amazon, but as you can see here, as I've been going through and finishing books, I have been trying to fill in the reviews. I've not done this page really, as you can see, but I'm trying to sit down and write some reviews as and when I finish the books in order to hopefully give you guys some better reviews in my wrap-ups. I'm just finding it quite difficult to get back into the swing of doing wrap-ups because I haven't really done them in so long, and I tend to forget what I've mentioned in my weekly reading vlogs and my thoughts on the books unless I've written them down, and so I'm definitely trying to get better. I hope you guys don't mind. If you have made it this far through into the video though and would like to let me know that you're still here, please go ahead and comment some snowy emojis down below. As February was the month of Polathon, it's only fitting that we include some snowy emojis, so if you don't have anything in particular that you would like to say but you would like to let me know that you're still here, please go ahead and do that now. As well as that, please don't forget to click the like button if you like this video and the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content from me. But that is it from me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. It truly does mean the world to me, and I will see you soon in my next video. Goodbye!